from the perspective that this is the medicine that we need in order to become healthy, to maintain our health, and also for each person to be very empowered about how they make choices about where their health goes. So much now, and certainly the people that I treat, and I treat everyone from, children with reflux right up to palliative care in cancer. I treat everything and everything in between. And if you've got a condition that is unusual and you don't know if it's actually, going to be able to be treated by herbal medicine, you just have to call me, because often what we need to do is just break apart what processes are going on there, and we can apply some kind of program. Okay, so a few myths about herbal medicine, particularly the system that I use. A lot of modern herbal medicine, because it's going down the road of this scientific modelling, they're using what we call a gross dose. Okay, and when you get a gross dosing, this means you get interactions with chemical medicine. So there's a lot of fear about herbal medicine. And sort of people experience this, where there's a fear of herbal medicine, particularly in conjunction with using their medications that have been prescribed by their doctor. The reason for that is because when you are a doctor or a vet, as the case may be, they're taught a very they're taught what they're taught. And when they're talking about interactions, they're talking about the maximum dose of a herb that's going to interact with the minimum dose of a chemical medicine. Okay, I operate so they keep upping the dosages until they get a reaction, and then they say this is the reaction. I have no doubt that that's the case. Those reactions definitely take place at those higher dosages. However, at the level that I operate, which is what we call trigger dosing, is almost a homeopathic dosing, which means that there's very little what's known as the active ingredient in the herb. We can safely use the herbs across the board, and I do so regularly. We don't have the issues. And of course there are some herbs that we know that we don't use with certain drugs. So of course we're well trained in those areas. So that's just sort of give you a little bit of a background on the safety and the efficacy of the safety element of herbal medicine. So I guess now just sort of thinking a little bit more about what it is that I can offer you tonight. Is there any sort of questions that maybe someone might like to ask me that they've had a curiosity about, maybe about what I might do and how I might be able to sort of be of assistance?
Cathy, is it any different to what people refer to as Chinese herbal medicine? Yes,
it is. Mediterranean herbal medicine is very different. It obviously because of the geographical difference and also the origins of the types of people, how it developed. So the cultures were very, very different. So Chinese herbal medicine has a lot of very strange things in it, like rhino horn and, bear bile and hideous things that really and truly, we probably would find very distasteful. And of course, it's sort of, there's always a lot of myth and legend associated with these things. So that sort of gets tied up into that cultural application of that medicine. But my personal experience with Chinese herbal medicine is that it's extremely hard to take, to actually, if you go to a Chinese herbalist, I'm sure it's very effective for a lot of people. But it's often you get bags and bags of herbs and you come home and then you're, brewing stuff up on the stove, and then you've got to take this ghastly mix, and then after about a week you're going, God, I can't taste any more of that. It's just too hard to manage.
I'm going to get better despite myself.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm better now.
Yeah. Which is often what happens. So unfortunately compliance isn't great with people who sort of, particularly, Western people, they sort of go, no way am I going to do that. So again, the herbal medicine that I do, being the trigger dose, the smallest dose possible to affect a change, is very, very easy to take. So they're in liquid extracts and they are usually in drop dosage, and so you can sort of, very comfortably take, some herbs in a little bit of water. So so there is a difference. The other thing that I would say too is that I think Chinese medicine, and I've often sort of, Dorothy Hall always said this, and I always feel that this is true because that's been my experience too, is that she said that Chinese medicine is really good for Chinese people. Okay, there's a genetic proclivity there that makes that Chinese medicine match with their gene pool really well.
And they seem to have less of a problem actually taking it.
Yes, because of that's the cultural accepted way to do it. Yeah. So again, that's why Dorothy's system has become a very successful system, because the compliance is really high, and of course our ability to navigate the different individual herbs that are in those mixes easily makes for very, very positive matches. So the condition or the individual person and the herbal remedy become a great match. Yeah. So sort of, yeah.
Cath, when you said that the active ingredient quantities are very small and it's almost homeopathic.
Yeah.
The question that I have around that is, what is it then that is effective? Is it the herb, or is it the placebo effect, or is it a combination of the two?
Look, I'm a great believer in the placebo effect, and I don't really think that the placebo... I think the placebo effect has been used as the thing as to why you don't do something. There are two effects, actually. There's a placebo effect and there's nocebo effect, okay? So you're probably familiar with those terms if you're into sort of mind-body medicine. And it's very important for me to make sure that the individual has a very positive experience in order to make use of the placebo effect, because that's a critical component of this medicine. Not saying that it also doesn't have a physical effect, and the reason I know that is because if we're talking about our consciousness impacting our own health and having the placebo effect, therefore you would expect that, and I've got another teacher called Dennis Stewart, who's the grandfather of herbal medicine in Australia, who uses a different system to what Dorothy uses. He uses the pharmacopoeia gross dosage system, and he would totally argue with Dorothy about this issue, and he'd say, there's not enough herb in there to even fix a mouse. However, in my experience, I treat horses, I treat dogs, I treat cats. They get better. They get better. And let me tell you, horses are not going to do anything you ask them to do. Anyone who knows a horse is not going, you're not going to magically transmit your thoughts into that horse and say you're going to get better. The horse, these are things where you cannot refute that empirical evidence. And the reason I believe that the trigger dose works is because it's actually it's triggering a biological response in our system at a genetic level to inspire the body's natural healing system to take.
Can you and do you up the dosage if it doesn't work initially?
Absolutely, and again, the beauty of this the smaller dosage that we're using is that we have such a latitude here. I mean, we've got the scope. You were talking about 7 bottles of beer. Before,
17.
Or 17 before you might even get a little bit of, well, if you're talking about negative side effects of herbal medicine, you would have to take litres of my remedies in order to get some crazy overdosing. Do you know what I mean? So this is why having the smaller dose and having the latitude to be able to manage the dose with such degrees is wonderful. It gives a wonderful...
Are you able to contradict addictions?
Addiction's very complex. And of course,
I'm thinking of smoking, so nothing.
Yeah, actually, well, that is a really exactly. Yes, indeed. Because, in fact, I actually make up a quit smoking mix, which is really effective. And again, if you really want to quit smoking, there's two things.
Well, it comes down to that psychology.
Okay, you have to really want to do it.
Yeah,
that's right.
Number 2 is you have to then detox the cravings. The cravings will actually disappear within 3 weeks. Okay, so in order to assist the individual to quit smoking, and we've done this a lot with people, we want to improve the oxygenation of their blood, we want to detox their system, we want to clear their lungs, we want to repair the damage, okay? So if you can get that person feeling really damn good in 3 weeks, they're going to want to keep going. They're going to want to keep going, and that's how we do that. And of course we use bark flowers. I don't know if you've heard of bark flowers. Yeah? The bark flowers work on these subliminal emotional issues in order to align you so that you can actually have this emotional release so that you're not feeling so addicted. Because addictive behaviours, I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons why people are addicted. To me, smoking's not the biggest problem. To me, sugar, wheat, alcohol, coffee have far more impact in our society, to me, at this stage of the game, than smoking probably does.
It's just when you combine them all.
If you're combining them all together, Because
I was thinking about an espresso martini.
but that's how we operate. And of course, because I'm working with systems of the body, I'm working to, I mean, who here studied biodynamic farming or ecosystems or any of these things? One of the things that I really love the idea of is that our body is an ecology. Not only are we an ecology, but we are in an ecology. So we're part of a living organism. So what we put in our bodies has to reflect the ecology of what we're experiencing on a day-to-day basis. The fact that we're so disconnected, we're going to universities, we're becoming, programmed to lock into this man-made system, but that's not who we are. I mean, we are human beings, we're animals, we're mammals, we're high-conscious, high-functioning mammal, but at the same time we're still animals, and we have all of these features of a society which is kind of in a way displacing itself because of the current man-made structures that we're sort of existing in. And this is obviously the grappling of our industrial times. We're transitioning now from coal-based fuel to renewable energy. So these are all relevant things that we all are kind of grappling with. To me, herbal medicine is the thing that's going to be helping us with the multi-resistant infections that's coming up. And even things like detoxing our system from environmental pollutants. This is where herbal medicine is what it's for. It even plays a role really beautifully in trauma medicine, pre and post-operative support. Repairing cells, repairing bones in a speedy way. I mean, there's so much that we do, that we can do, and I do on a regular basis with clients and animals around the world that we just get amazing results with.
Just on that, can I ask you a couple of questions?
Sure.
I have a really wonderful friend that I've had for 42 years actually, and she's a vet on Vancouver Island.
Yeah.
And I visited with her a couple of months ago, and she uses herbal medicines in her practice the whole time, and she's even got some from Australia, which is really interesting. So she may have something.
She possibly does, but I have a lot of vets who refer to
I was just intrigued, and it was wonderful to know that she was doing that because I mean we've known each other for so long, we have similar ideas and that. And I was just intrigued as to how many vets are sort of crossing over to actually use more herbal medicines.
Okay.
Particularly in Australia.
Okay. Australia is an interesting place for this to be occurring because there's a couple of advantages we have here. One is Dorothy Hall and Dennis Stewart, being the grandfather and grandmother of herbal medicine, really set the rules up in Australia to allow herbalists to actually function in the traditional way. The reason that you have me is because the law says I can manufacture my herbal medicines and I can give them to an individual client, okay, as per the old method of prescribing, okay. That is why I'm here today. So we can be really thankful to those people. And because of that, this has infiltrated, because I don't know, you're probably all familiar with my ex-husband, Robert McDowell, who started this business. I mean, he was probably the original herbalist. He was one of Dorothy's first male students back in the early 80s, and she was, of course, he was a favourite of hers, and he was an entrepreneurial type of man and a wonderful herbalist. And what he did is, about 25 years ago, he could see there was something with the animals that he could, basically, because he was entrepreneurial, I can capitalise on this is what he was like. But it also had an incredible impact on the culture of herbal medicine in Australia. And what it did, he was the forerunner, he was a pioneer, and this is where I came in because I was into horses. I came in as well, and we just basically just spread this incredible system all throughout Australia. And there are so many herbalists now that we have taught because of this, and now I employ a vet. I worked with Angus McKibben, and Angus McKibben is probably one of the most qualified alternative vets in Australia. He's now retired, unfortunately, a very good friend of mine. But at the same time, having worked with Angus as a vet nurse in very early years, gave me a great deal of insight into pharmacology and also therapeutic application with animals. And then from there, we've been able to get lots of associations with vets, and vets very slowly are coming to this. It's about a 50-50 mix at the moment, where we've got vets coming on board. And like I say, I've got a vet who works for me. Her name's Dr. Raquel Butler, and she's absolutely a magnificent vet. She's very holistic, but also works with the medicine. And yeah, there's just people all around the world as well, vets that are coming in. And don't worry, there are still the ones who are very, very, no, this is crazy. But we treat, for example, a classic one. I spoke to a client today on this very subject, where we treated a little dog of hers that had Cushing's disease. I don't know if anyone's heard of Cushing's disease, but it's a tumour of the pituitary gland. And what happens is there's an adrenal issue going on. It's quite a complex set of circumstances that are going on, and the drugs are very limited with animals and with people. However, we've been treating Cushing successfully for about 5 or 6 years now, and this little dog went to the vet. They didn't know what to do. The owner didn't want to put it on the drugs that they were thinking of putting it on, and we did the program. Well, that dog 3 or 4 years later is just doing absolutely marvellously, and that vet recommends all Cushing's program to us, every single one, and all of them are coming right. So you see, if you get it in there, and this is why vets are so good, because vets have got a bit of latitude too. This is the thing. A bit different. They are.
And I remember, like my first degree in ag, so I know a bit about, and I've worked a lot with vets. But I remember talking to Carol Hungerford once, and I went to her and she said, you go to a doctor and they don't ask you what you eat.
Yeah.
You go to a vet and they say, what are you feeding your animals? Don't wait. Vets are totally different the way they think. They think, so they're much more open to the herbal medicines, medicines compared with doctors. Because the nutritional side of things is so important to them.
Well, it is, and particularly in Australia. I mean, and again, it depends on what country you're in too. I mean, this is why I brought up the issue of culture when we're talking about medicine, because the cultural impact of where we are with our health is so critical to understand. For example, in France, this is normal. Herbal medicine's normal. Biodynamics is normal.
Do you?
That's normal. That's normal in France.
I have a great interest in all things Indigenous, and with a culture that old, we've a lot to learn from. And I suspect that their view of herbalism would be similar.
It's absolutely similar. The Aboriginal people, though, it's secret business, and they have not let anyone know, because I believe they haven't told anyone the depth of their knowledge, because they haven't respected anyone to hand it on to.
No.
And maybe it has been lost. I'm sure somebody out there is harbouring the knowledge and preserving it somehow in the oral tradition that they probably had in and I would hope so.
Probably more in the Northern Territory.
Possibly, yes, but I can tell you now that from as a herbalist, we don't get that information.
No.
It's more readily available. For example, you'll get a lot of the Amazon shamans. Right. All of that information's coming through, so you're getting a lot of the Amazon herbs now being really, well, I call it hijacked by science, but they're getting hijacked.
Cathy, what about cancer? It seems, I read a thing recently about how you can clear up a lot of toxins by eating just good tucker. It seemed to me that, when you're being treated for cancer with traditional medicine, they load you up with a lot of toxic substances, and well, 2 questions then come to mind is, can herbal medicine help clear that rubbish out, if you suppose, or should you be using that instead of?
That's a whole other green drink, isn't it?
That is a whole other green drink. So I can talk about, because I'm not by law legally able to treat cancer.
No.
Okay, so whatever I say today will simply just be a hypothetical
Yes,
answer.
yeah, I understand.
Okay, so in that answer, yes, you can. Hypothetically, you can do that. And my understanding of cancer is two things. It's inflammation, systemic inflammation, and of course the healing response to that becomes a genetic distortion. So therefore you get a healing response gone wrong. So you have the tumours or the cancers running rampant with the cells not switching off. So there's this idea that the terminator gene, or the gene in there that's meant to stop it from spreading, or meant to stop the cells from replicating, it's not doing it.
Yeah.
That's a very simplistic, version of it. And so what I do, I treat inflammation. All of my treatments for people particularly, and I find this is the primary issue for everything from cholesterol to cancer to, in any number of strange conditions, even rheumatoid arthritis, hormonal imbalance, you will find at its basis there will be systemic inflammation. And depending on the genetic predisposition of the individual, it will manifest in any number of ways. So
the process, it just gives different results.
It gives different results. I mean, if you can imagine the body, that there's different sieves or we're different projections, and our gene pool tells us where we're weak, where we're strong.
Yeah.
And I don't know if anyone's heard of the term epigenetics. You've heard of Yep. Okay. So this is the idea that certain genes are switched on with certain particular stimulation. Okay. Now, if we are stimulating our body, first of all, when we're born in a Western, world like this, and we're told to give certain types of food, and particularly the food pyramid, which I will say outright, the food pyramid that is totally promoted by the government,
wheat growers,
and the wheat growers, and the dairy board, and the meat growers. I mean, it is just appalling. It is so not where we need to be going with our food.
The fact that they've only just removed sugar as a food group. Sugar used to be a food group.
It's just crazy. So you can see the decline of our health and the decline of, the increase of chronic disease, particularly generational chronic disease, the increase of obesity, which I believe, quite frankly, is probably the number one issue in Australia.
Thank you, sugar, wheat, processed foods.
Yes, exactly. And, of course, all the associated complications, diabetes, heart problems, cholesterol issues, insulin resistance, the list goes on. And, in fact, rheumatoid arthritis and even things like infertility, menstrual irregularity, all these things I really feel are linked back to this one problem.
How do you deal it all with children who have severe allergic reactions? There seem to be more and more children these days that have very serious anaphylactic type reactions.
I've been doing a lot of research on that myself, like study research, not so much empirical research through the clinic, although I do see the results we get. To me, this has got to do with the gut. This has got to do with gut flora and the fact that there seems to be a link between the overabundant use of vaccines, and there seems to be a link between an overabundant use of foods that are unfortunately grown with glycophosphates. And the problem is with the glycophosphates is that whilst they aren't killing the plant that they are actually meant to be protecting, the glycophosphates are killing the bacteria in our gut, because the glycophosphate does not break down sufficiently enough in the plant tissue. It's in the plant tissue, we ingest it, and this is where the issue to me begins, where you're actually killing off our digestive bacteria, and that's where I think there's two things going on there.
Would organic foods be free of these phosphates?
So, it's a genetic thing. It's the genetically modified foods that are the biggest problem, and the monocultures. So, of course, the monocropping, which is the big issue. So, diverse genetically, non-modified foods is where you change this, and then of course having a knowledge of if you feel that this has impacted you, and of course you may not know, but I can do iris diagnosis and I can discuss with each person to see whether or not there's an impact there. Herbs possibly can correct some of that, and I do a lot of treatment. Allergy is one of the biggies. It's one of the biggies in the practice for kids. Yeah, and animals too. Yeah.
On the SDS for the glycophosphates, they're saying that as soon as it hits the ground, it starts to break down, and it's sort of gone within 6 hours on the plant.
Well, I'd like to see the science on that. Thanks very much. I am a great believer in the fact that there's a lot of science that's done for the benefit of those who are actually doing the science.
And when you
for
see
their
that
own
companies
means.
like Monsanto don't release the results of their own research and suppress other people's research in court, I mean, that speaks for itself, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everyone knows about Monsanto now. I mean, Monsanto used to be, like 10 years ago when I was talking about this 10 years ago, who are Monsanto? Everyone knows about Monsanto now and what they're doing with the seeds, what they're trying to, they're trying to monopolise the food industry for their own, profits.
Can I ask you, when Cameron asked you about the homeopathic remedies, can you position herbal medicine in with homeopathy and naturopathy? Where do those three sit?
That is a really good question. A lot of people get confused by that. Okay, to me, herbal medicine is peak nutrition. Okay, it's peak nutrition that there's a solidity to it. So the body identifies it as nutritious food. It's bio available, so the body can make use of it immediately. Okay, because there is an element of homeopathic. So does everybody sort of have an understanding what homeopathics are?
Yeah.
Okay, so homeopathics are. I'll just explain what homeopathics are. Homeopathics are what's called energy medicine. Okay, where there is what's termed an energy signature in the water, which in effect, when you take it, will affect your energy field. So there's this idea that we are energy, we're made of energy. It kind of gets a bit spiritual.
Yeah, being proved, though, with modern science.
And in water too, that water has memory. Well, is that the related things?
Yeah, well, that's the Emoto stuff. That's really interesting what he's done. I think this might be slightly different though. Right. I think that there is definitely something to be said for homeopathics. My sister actually is a very, very good homeopath in Bathurst. Her name's Alison Eastman. And her knowledge of homeopathics, probably I'm not saying it quite the way she would, but to me, my understanding is that it's the most dilute substance to the point where you cannot measure anything in the water. And it seems at the end of the day, it seems like there's nothing in there, nothing scientifically measurable. However, there must be something going on because Dorothy Hall, who being my teacher, she was a very good homeopath herself. She stopped doing homeopathics because she said you can do harm with homeopathics because you can make changes at the DNA level.
Whoa.
Yeah. Now, I kind of went, okay, I don't know about that. However, new science that I've just been looking at is it's coming onto the money. That if you have an understanding of energy at that level, you can influence these blueprints, these genetic blueprints. And they're called miasms. There's like each person has at its genetic level. There's a miasm of how you're going to sort of evolve physically, and that's where homeopathic operates at that level. Very, very powerful medicine. See, I look at it like this, and this is because I get a bit. As my father says, he goes, yes, but you're off with the pixies.
Stay there. Stay there.
But I like it from the idea that what we are inside, the congruency of our mind and our heart and our physical body, that alignment, the more aligned we become, the more the external world will reflect that. Whereas I think a lot of people think that if we fix out there, then, that out there has to be fixed because everything's away from us, then we will somehow be better. But that's not actually true. If we fix ourselves here, we fix our mind, we fix our heart, we fix our physical body, then we have the strength to then emotionally carry on and impart that wisdom to the next generation. What I see happening now is that there is a lack of wisdom being imparted to the next generation that is really, really chronic. You know, and I see this with the graduates of the vet and the medical profession, because the old vets and the old medicos kind of had this link to the old world, where they're eating, from hoof to farm, from farm to table. Like, they had an understanding of how life worked. They saw death around them. They were experiencing that in a more cultural way. There was the doctor was going on his horse from door to door, and it was a very community-based thing. This is no longer the case. So there's no human connection anymore with what's going on. And one of the things that makes what I do very unique, and this is what we get told all the time, because all my staff are so connected to wanting to make sure that they're connecting with the individual person, that it's that connection, which is, it comes back to the placebo effect, where if you can connect with that individual person and just give them the idea, you're not selling them a magic cure. We don't sell magic cures. That's not what we do. We connect with people and we give them a plan of how they might be able to navigate some very unpleasant times.
The connection is part of the healing.
The connection is absolutely essential. It's absolutely essential. Reconnecting people back to themselves, back to the earth, and back to their place of who they are.
But also having a healer.
Having a healer, yeah. And
someone you can have trust in.
That's right. So there's definitely the relationship of trust, and of course knowing that maybe there is a shining light and they can navigate out of that darkness is really, really valuable. And I love it when I see, I do a lot of talks for the Relationship Australia crew, and I also come up here and I work sometimes with the young kids up here doing those Munchies programs, I think it's called. Yeah, so I've done a couple of those, and just to me, just getting people to see there's something different that can be happening is really, really important. Yeah.
Break that cycle.
And just break that cycle. Yeah, absolutely. So
what you're talking about is empathy, which goes with compassion and care. So being able to show empathy to your animals and to people, brings out that compassion, that heart connection, which is at the core of.
It is the core of it, and if anyone's interested, I actually write a newsletter. It goes out every fortnight, and I write on these topics. I've brought some of these newsletters with me if you're interested in taking them, but I talk about this as being a really pivotal and key factor in the healing process. Yeah, absolutely.
You can come back to Rahamim anytime.
Oh. You also talked about, I was intrigued at the beginning when you talked about Dorothy Hall and her knowledge of cosmology and how cosmology links in with all of that. Would you like to say some more about that?
Okay,
Because that's very essential to who we are, what we're doing.
Okay. I guess it depends on which side of the fence. I mean, without wanting to sort of be too woo-hoo with everything, but I use astrology as a science, not astrology as a predictive tool, though it can be predictive because precession of equinoxes and things like that do have play a big role. But the individual sun signs and how you were born and the astrological alignments actually influence your physicality, and people find that very hard to believe, but it's actually very true. And 9 times out of 10 I could just talk to you if I knew what your star. I could probably guess what your star sign is anyway after three questions. And it sounds so 70s and schoolyard, but it's actually so amazingly not that, because it is such a big science in its day.
Have you got an example of maybe how you, if you had an appointment with someone, how you might work that in with your...
Well, normally I just ask you your birth date, and then I ask, and if I'm a bit thick on the day, which sometimes happen, I can't quite work out. Okay, what star sign is that? Yeah, okay. I'll ask you, because people are a little bit more open these days. It used to be when Dorothy taught us this system, she'd say, just ask for their birthday. Don't say you're going to be doing astrology. People don't like that. I'm a little
Cath, you've got to admit that that's cheating, though. If that's one of the questions, if that's one of the 3 questions to guess your star sign.
And what's the sign?
So anyway, for example, that's what I thought. I brought my chart with me because I do have a cheat sheet. for this. But you can pretty well much categorise, because as personality types, because this goes back to the thinking of how we think, what we believe, and you wouldn't really credit it, but you actually do operate at subconscious levels that you don't really realise that you are. And for example, the Aries type. Okay, I'll just talk about the Aries type, because it's very interesting, because you might, if there's Aries in here, you might
Yes,
sort
there
of,
are.
yeah. Okay, so one of the
Wouldn't be
things,
you, Hetty, would it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
One of the things about Aries is that they are pretty impatient, they're pretty rash. And they go right ahead, and they go right ahead, you know, and they're sort of, you know, they just like to, they ram into things, you know, they're right in there. And they tend to, and they're quite cerebral, and they can often overanalyze things quite a lot, and they are what we call a fire sign. So if you're looking at Chinese medicine, you can actually look at, say, okay, there's a Chinese medicine kind of flavour there. So there's a fiery temperament. There are herbs that coal pepper. So I'll just show you the coal pepper book. This is one of the old texts. You're welcome to have a look at that. The beautiful plates in that book have been taken out, but it is actually it is a good text of coal pepper. Talks about the astrological nature of each herb. Okay.
Sounds like a pop band.
Coal pepper. Yeah, he's famous. He's famous. Yeah, he's famous. He was the
royal kind of ostracised and hammered by the medical institute of
that's
science.
right. That's
a really
right.
hard time.
That's right. He was, but he grew the herbs. He picked them at certain times of the day under certain. I mean, he was a witch. He was a pagan, you know, like he was a genuine, and this is where the negative sort of connotations have come from. One of the things about Aries is that they love to be with children, and they like actually, you know, making sure children, the next generation, is very important to them. Okay, they're pretty black and white. They're active. They can be quite gullible, and you know, and they can sort of, you know, take you on first word. But what they need is they need physical strengthening herbs, because they can become quite vulnerable in their physical body, and they're often prone to circulation issues, and they're often prone to head issues or sort of memory issues, and also varicose veins. So there's a couple of things there. So and their nervous system can be a little bit of a drama too. So we tend to sort of work with them in, you know, with herbs that support those areas.
And would you utilise that, say, people were just coming in for like rather than having specific health issues, that might be an area where you
if someone just
expand on.
Yeah, if someone was coming to see me without the specifics, okay, because don't get me wrong, I look at all the medical reports. I love having people going and getting diagnosis from doctors. I love it. That's fine. That's great. But if you're coming to me and you don't have an idea of why you're coming to me and you just want a tonic, I'll probably go to something like this.
If you were to walk down the street and ask 100 different people at random, you would find, and I pretty much would bet $100 on this or whatever, that if you would ask women, they would generally believe in astrology. If you ask men, they would kibosh it completely. So my question is to you, why do you think that difference exists? And it is quite real, it's quite noticeable.
Well,
that's why.
I think because it's just a cultural thing. I just think it's because guys
Scientists don't have a bar in it, so it's ruling out half the population in terms of a logical approach. So a rational scientific approach.
Yeah, but that's only because if they're using that scientific model. Empirically, it actually does actually match up.
I've not seen that.
Yeah,
Not in our culture, but
No,
I mean,
no,
back in Roman times, the men believed in it strongly.
I think there's a lot to be said for it. I think you'll find there's probably a lot more data out there. I mean, I wouldn't be looking for scientific, you know, rigid papers on it. You know, I think there's, to me, and I think Dorothy was a good one at saying this too. If you're still using it, there's something to it. You know, humans don't keep doing things if it's not kind of relevant in some way. And what you've got to remember is that astrology was the tool that was used to try and break down. It was their psychology. It was, you know, Roman psychology. It was Tibetan psychology. It was, you know, and because they had this understanding of the link with the cosmology, they linked it to that. So you know, maybe some of the modern, you know, teachings don't necessarily apply now because of maybe astrologically there's changes up in the cosmology, because there's been precessions and there's been, you know, the stars are in different places now.
I guess I raised the point, just the fact that, you know, if you meet a lot of men and you talk astrology, they'll start to tune out, I think.
Oh, but I don't talk astrology to men.
Okay.
In the clinic. Oh no, I'm a little bit more tuned in than that. Yeah, I'm just giving you some background of how I might do something. So yeah, and so it would be in that case with a guy who might be a little bit, you know, I would use my cheat sheet. I'm not.
You didn't really say thick, did you?
They're not quite. I think it's more to do with the left and right brain.
Yeah.
You know, it's just you know they're more just much more, you know, involved in their practical stuff.
I don't know if I agree with that. I think there are a lot of men very much tuned in to that side, the emotional side, the feminine side, if you like. But I just have to, I don't want to be provocative, but do you believe that Shakespeare was way off the mark when he said the fault of the Brutus lies not in the stars but in ourselves?
Oh no, I totally agree with that.
Now the thing is that leads to, I really take on board what you say about your treatment, where you're really starting from the spiritual side, which is the inner side, that everything really does come from the heart.
It really does come from
Within.
From within. But in order for our awareness to create some type of I guess it's more to do with what is it that we do believe in. Okay, I mean, for some reason we need to have a framework within which we can fill ourselves up to and understand, and if that makes sense. And so if we're already moving away from our understanding of self, because children are fairly together until they get conditioned, and they're starting to, you know, be conditioned out of that. Astrology is a great way to change our thinking in a different way. And I guess, you know, if you look at Antipodean calendars and planting and biodynamics, they all use astrology.
They do.
They all use astrology because of the understanding of the impact of the stars in alignment on some electromagnetic, whatever level, cosmic level. We don't actually fully understand why, but there is definitely something.
So what you're saying is really just a tool.
It's a tool.
It's a tool to bring you back to that. Of itself, it doesn't really have any validity except as the use of the tool as a tool.
Absolutely, as psychology does.
Kind of a lens in a way.
As psychology does.
Seeing as I got exposed. In
Oh, okay.
Well, I could have exposed another person, but
Now, when you
when you
gave the general characteristics, obviously from the way people love, it fitted perfectly.
Yeah.
But when you got to the things that are commonly suffered from, I don't suffer from them.
Okay.
I don't have varicose veins.
That's because you're so fit.
Never have.
Yeah, well, because you may not necessarily manifest these things. I mean, this is where the astrology says, okay, these can be areas that if you're struggling with, for example, say someone comes to me and you're just going, what am I going to prescribe this person because it's really not clear what's happening, then you might revert back to something like this. I would revert to something like this maybe 30% of my clients now. When I first started, I was really kind of rigid about it, you know, but now I have I've probably expanded my understanding of herbal medicine, and I work far more instinctively and intuitively now.
So each of us sort of really expresses our disease with things in our own particular way, and that's kind of, if they're not sure where it's coming from, that's a guide.
It's just a guide.
Yeah.
And again, it's like iridology. Iridology can also reveal, in fact, it's probably more accurate in the sense that it would reveal more there. So it's just another element that I can bring in to check cross-reference too. It certainly isn't the way that I prescribe, it's just part of how it might work.
You haven't mentioned the thing I do suffer from. Osteoarthritis.
Well, it's not, that would have to come from your iris. But if you've got a blue iris with a lot of white in it, then that would be obvious, which I can see from here. They are a very strong blue iris, with probably a lot of white. Yeah, so that's the predisposition to osteoarthritis. Yeah.
Cath, just to move away from the astrological side of things and back into...
Trust the bloke.
No, well, see, I'm one of the...
You want to go back to cosmology,
well, yes, but I actually wanted to touch on mental health.
Yes.
Because although we've kind of skirted around it, we haven't actually asked that specific question. And I'm going to guess the answer being yes.
Yeah.
But do you have an approach to mental health issues through your practice as well?
It depends on the level of mental health. I deal a lot with grief, and I find that with the grief depression, anxiety, and grief are the three things that I deal with primarily, and I have a very clear support system for that in an alternative framework. So I would be using other practitioners that I would refer those people to, and these people are people that are probably on antidepressants, they've probably been to psychologists, they're seeing a number of different counsellors. I would always make sure that was also part of what they're doing. But a good case study, just to sort of give you an idea, is I had a lady that was had been seeing a psychologist, and this was actually a phone Skype consultation that I did with this lady. She had severe depression to the point where she was going to her counsellor or psychologist every 2 weeks, and it was just getting nowhere, and she was just at her wit's end. I mean, she was probably near, thinking this is just not going to ever get changed. And when I spoke to her and I said, when did this start to happen? And she said, postnatal depression. Bang, straight away. I said, right, okay. Then what other traumas have happened? Okay, before the postnatal depression, significant trauma of a certain type, which was the trigger. Okay, so what we're looking at is the classic case of adrenal fatigue, where the adrenal system has just been shot to pieces. It's the coping mechanism, because usually a lot of people that are very they're on the verge of depression and they're quite well established, they're very strong people usually, and they're very good at being able to do what they normally do, and they keep going, and then eventually they just get to a point where it's like, oh my God, I just don't know what's happening to me, and that's where it all gets a bit scary, because they think they're losing their mind. They're close to a psychotic break in their mind. So with this lady, I ended up realising that this was very hormonally triggered, okay? And of course all depression and all anxiety is hormonal, because all of these things do have a feedback into our adrenal system. It causes an imbalance between the hypothalamus, the thyroid, and the adrenal system, so it throws the axis out. And this is of course this is our energy. This is how we metabolize our food. This is how we make use of what's known as ATP in our system. This is how we make use of the energy that we're given. So I was able to treat her for adrenal fatigue and hormone imbalance, and I treated those areas. She had such a remarkable turnaround that the psychologist just rang me and said, "What did you do?" and is referring all her patients to me. So yeah, that just shows you what the power of the herbal medicine is. But you've got to have an understanding of that link. And again, I've written some articles on that, and that's to do with the emotions, the link between grief and suppressing grief, the impact of that on the adrenal cortex and also the thyroid, hypothalamus and adrenal axis, and then the support that I give to try and bring that around, which of course has the knock-on effect of producing the energy so that the serotonin can be balanced. The serotonin to me is the third or fourth thing that goes out of whack.
But that's the first thing that modern medicine...
But that's the first thing modern medicine pick up. Yeah.
And they use a shotgun approach to it too.
It's a shotgun approach, and of course there's also the onus on the person trying to get better, but they don't have the energy to get better. This is the problem. They don't have the energy to actually feel better within themselves in order to change their thinking that might be impacting this negative cycle. So I approach it where I build their system up exponentially. I then explain to them, okay, and this
exponentially or incrementally?
Incrementally, I should say.
Exponentially great.
Exponentially, they're great.
A little from column A, a little from
Yeah.
column B.
You haven't had enough alcohol tonight, Cameron.
I've had my homeopathic
homeopathic so I incrementally build them up. Thank you very much. And from that point, I then, help them to understand the process of what they'll be going through. Because one of the things about, which is very little known in modern mental health, other than the fact they witness it, but from my perspective, healing is a process, just like any kind of counselling, whatever. There is a process that you go through. And when you're dealing with someone who's been chronically fatigued or chronically depressed, and then they're dealing with anxiety and all these things, and you start to build their system up, they start to fall apart and they think they're getting worse. And that's when the doctor comes in and says, right, more antidepressants, and so they start getting like this again. This is my analogy for emotional woundedness and how to move through this and the impact of the hormones with this. If you can imagine that everyone who experiences any kind of emotional grief, whatever, it's trauma. So in a way, everyone kind of is experiencing and has experienced and is experiencing what we call post-traumatic stress disorder. So from the time that they were either born or whatever the cause of the stress was, if say you're a tuning fork and you hit the tuning fork and it's vibrating, this is the trauma. What happens is that the trauma is happening, and normally if you just let that tuning fork do its thing, it will just dissipate. The energy will dissipate out of that. But what happens with us is that because we've got our mind at work and we're told to get better and we need to keep going on, we don't allow that full cycle of trauma to move through our body. We're not given the opportunity to fully experience the range of the emotions, and then of course the consequence of the toxin of the hormonal imbalances that occur from that. So we spend a lot of energy then pushing down the thinking that we're supposed to be getting better and normal. So yeah, we've got over that. We're dealing. This is coping. This is what psychology calls coping. So there's the coping strategies, okay. But the body has not forgotten. The shock is still there. All we've done is put a lovely vacuum over that tuning fork, and it's no longer vibrating, but the energy is still in it. Okay. Now what happens is over time, every shock you have is treated the same way until eventually it gets to a point where this little covering that we think we've put on top of it, it starts to come undone. And okay, in women, classic with women, perimenopause is where you'll see the biggest start of this happening. You get all this crying happening spontaneously and you don't know why. The world seems fine out there, life's going not too bad. Next thing you know, everyone's crying. I don't know what's wrong with me. And this is very common.
That never happens to me.
Okay, so once you understand this, we're saying, oh, it's perimenopause. Okay, you need HRT or you might need antidepressants. Okay, that's not how I treat that. I treat this as, okay, you're feeling fatigue. Usually there's a massive fatigue associated with this. So with the fatigue, it gets more and more and more, crying more and more and more. Then you look at the diet goes out the window. So everything starts to get to the point where it's at the bottom. When you come to see me, I change all of that. I change the diet, which I've got here for people to take. I've got the information for that, and then we build it up very, very carefully, incrementally, until we get to a point where we're feeling good. But at the point that we're feeling good, the physical body starts to feel strong. Guess what happens? The physical body, because it's a natural system, says, I'm now ready to shed the rest of this vibration that you have not let me shed before, because we take the lid off it. So bit by bit, this starts to come up. So we start to have more crying fits, but we have more crying fits, but when we finish the crying fits or the emotional breakdown, you feel stronger post them, not fatigued post them. Okay, and then we're doing this, okay, until eventually you get to a point where you are absolutely balanced. And that's how I treat those conditions.
Cathy, have you had any luck with any not luck, success with post-traumatic stress? I think about like soldiers. My brother was a Vietnam veteran, and I read recently that in America there's over 400,000 who are still suffering 40 years after the war.
It makes my heart break.
They're doing nothing that works. When you say about learning, we don't learn a rat wouldn't go through the same thing that many times. It's ridiculous.
Well, this is because of our capacity to disconnect our head from our heart.
Yeah.
And because we can do this, and this is where, you don't want to go into it, but
No.
anyway, that is the tragedy, because you can create a robot.
Pharmaceutical companies are making huge amounts of money.
Yeah.
And people are killing themselves, just
Yes.
because it's...
And it's kind of like the absurdity where we pay such homage, and we've almost glorified the dead soldier who's died for our country, and we pay homage to him. And then there's the homeless veteran without support on the side of the street. I just find that just...
If we give him support, we give him treatment and stuff, that doesn't work. That's a sad
No, because
thing.
there's an inherent lack of understanding of post-traumatic stress disorder, which I've just explained to you why. I just explained what the problem is. And there is a lot of research. The reason I know this is because I studied breath work. There's a lot of PhD work coming out now on post-traumatic stress and breath work. And the only thing that they're not doing is they're not understanding the fact that the physical body has to be strong enough in order to shed the stress.
Okay.
The physical body has to be strong enough. Otherwise, the body just will stay in self-protection.
Yes.
Because we're a psychoorganism.
That makes sense,
Okay.
yeah.
Is that part of that physical strength and physical wellness also potentially related to some of the chemicals that they were exposed to during the war? When they talk about like the Agent Orange and all the chemicals that they used in those warfare times, making a big, massive impact on these people. So physically they can't get well, so then mentally they can't get well.
Correct. Yeah. So I don't know. I've only treated a couple of soldiers, but they were in intelligence. And don't worry, the guys in intelligence who were in Afghanistan, they were doing interrogation. Yeah.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, that's not nice.
That's trauma.
Yeah, that was trauma, but they weren't exposed to chemicals. But they were certainly exposed to atrocities.
Well, they're exposed to massive amounts of almost experimental vaccines.
Yeah, well, that's happening too. Yeah, it is outrageous.
So,
Yeah.
you mentioned post-traumatic stress disorder. I've been an advocate and used it for some while now, EFT, emotional freedom technique, which is now, a little while ago, was endorsed by the American Psychology Association for the treatment of that. And, probably Gary Craig who started EFT, and I've got all his stuff. And there's classic cases there, people 30, 40 years of traumatic disorder from the Vietnam War, in 30, 40 minutes, gone forever.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, that is amazing.
That's tapping, isn't it?
I don't understand that. I don't understand that, to be honest. I actually did the EFT training with Lionel when he came here.
I've taken cigarette smokers in 3 or 4 minutes had them stop smoking.
Yeah.
They smoke again. Because you can stop them there. I've done that. They wanted to have a cigarette and I said, put it down, and I tapped and they said, I don't want it. And they might smoke a bit later on. If they stopped and they tapped again, might be 2, 3 days, it's gone. It is gone.
I mean, I'd be interested to see the studies, not so much on smoking, but on post-traumatic stress, because that to me is a very, very complex, particularly for veterans. It's a very, very complex
story. I have the DVD somewhere with Gary Craig, and it's a lifetime event, about 40 minutes lifetime, no editing whatsoever, with a Vietnam vet who went through a horrific thing, where he just machine gunned this young boy coming towards him, and he gave it graphic detail, and he couldn't do it, and he had to stop and tap and get through that, because there are aspects that rise up, and he got through that. By the end of it, it's like playing a movie. It didn't affect him, it did. He felt for it, but he wasn't connected to it anymore.
Yeah, okay. There's other techniques, like there's EFT, there's kinesiology, and holographic kinetics, and various other modalities that work like that.
NLP.
And NLP. My question is, how connected then is that person, and are they able to really feel the depth of love? And I think that's the question that I would ask. How open can that person be in their heart?
I think it would make them more connected.
Well, yes.
It's a good point you raise.
Yeah, that is just my rhetorical question. It's just a question.
Making, which I understand and respect, is
because to me,
disassociating yourself from the empathy and the compassion from the event.
Correct. I mean, they're two different states.
Yeah.
And I feel that to be fully integrated and to have total healing,
Yes.
you have the full range of motion and capacity to open up.
I agree.
Okay?
Absolutely.
And to be unafraid to do that.
Yes, I agree. I think you could achieve that with the 40 minutes of having done that and understand the circumstance how it could, I think you could do that.
Yeah, okay.
I take your point, I think it's valid.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
Thanks. That's just my experience with kinesiology.
Because it's a bit like taking a pill, you're masking the symptoms.
Well, this is my suggestion, because if it's a neurological connection in the brain, you can do that. Yeah.
Besides which, I'd rather take the drug than alcohol rather than doing this sort of thing.
Fair enough.
They do that to get over the guilt thing.
Yeah.
I have a Vietnam.
Yeah, okay. It's probably 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Yep, okay. Do you have any more
What
questions?
about children with behavioural disorders, ADD, ADHD, oppositional behaviour?
Yep. So, absolutely. I do treat that all the time. That's a very strong part of the practice, where I actually work with kinesiologists who treat this a lot, and I have a herb that I harvest specifically for this. It's up at Mount Canobolas. It's the maritime pine bark. A lot of studies have been done on that herb. Maritime pine bark is what we use for that condition.
Kathy,
with good results, by the way, like amazing results.
With that, I was just going to quickly ask, most of your herbs Australian based?
50-50. I try to get as much as I can here within Australia, but there are some herbs that I just have to import.
What's the chances of developing that area, of growing more herbs?
Look, it'd be lovely. It'd be really lovely, but it's very expensive in Australia to grow herbs. That's the problem. Yeah, I get a lot of my herbs from Egypt. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, that's probably as much as I can do today, and I hope that I was able to give you some food for thought and something really interesting. And I'd love to come back and talk more about other things. There, we've got lots of topics.